Welcome to Burn the Rules with Chet Hirani. This podcast is for people who know leadership isn't about titles, noise, or ticking boxes. It's about how you think, how you show up, and how you perform when pressure is real. I'm Chet Hirani, and I work with leaders and high performers across business, sport, and life all over the world who want to take control of how they lead and perform. Not by copying someone else's rules, but by understanding themselves first. Every conversation here is grounded in experience, reflection, and practical insight. So if you're ready to question what leadership has been taught to be and decide what it means for you, you're in the right place. What do you do when the world makes you visible for the worst possible reason, and you have no control over the story being told about you? Michelle Raymond knows that feeling better than most. She's a 25-year HR veteran who's worked inside some of the world's most complex organizations. She's a non-executive director, a TEDx speaker, an author, and one of the most sharp-minded leadership strategists working today. But none of that came easily, and none of it came first. Before the career, the books, and the boardroom, there was a period where Michelle was being defined by a story she didn't write. And in the middle of it all, she made one decision that changed everything. She would never let anyone else control her visibility. This is one of the most honest conversations we've had on Burn the Rules. So let's get right into it. Hey, Michelle, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. I'm glad to be here. Really good to be here.
Yeah, finally. Look, thank you so much for being part of Burn the Rules today. Super excited to have you as a guest on the show. We've known each other for a number of years, right? But I think this is probably the first time that we're actually virtually face-to-face, should we say? We were supposed to be face-to-face, but you know what? It happened.
It's Clubhouse, from Clubhouse days, right?
Exactly, yeah, Clubhouse. Yeah,
and that just
6 years?
just shows you exactly almost 6 years, and we connected online because we couldn't meet in person, and now this is happening. With all what's going on in the world, we haven't got to meet, but I just feel like I know you already, right?
Yeah, and I mean, the beauty of social media, that's the way I say it, right? You always can sort of keep tabs on like what people are doing. Look, everybody's nosy. I'm nosy. I'm happy to say that, right? Okay. I'm always going to be on Insta stories, checking out what Michelle's doing and doing all that sort of stuff, right?
Love it.
But it's good.
I love it. It's been good.
Yeah. So tell me, Michelle, what's been taking up your headspace this week? What's been busy for you? How has everything been?
Yeah. So for the last few weeks, and as you know, that I'm out here in Dubai. So with all what's been going on, it's been a challenge. It's trying to navigate what's going on in the world, what's going on here, how it's impacting me mentally, how it's impacting the business. So I think for me, this week, like last week and half of the week before, is just navigating the changes. Things have just changed so quickly out here in terms of people traveling back to their home countries. Lots of corporates and companies are tightening up their budgets. So they're spending more cautiously, but when they're spending big because they know what results or what they're looking for at the moment, which is always a good thing, right? So it's just navigating these choppy waters, but yeah, I'm still here. And one thing I am the queen of pivot. If I need to change or make something, I'm going to survive out here, and not just survive, I'm going to thrive. Yeah. So I'm just navigating right now.
I love it. The queen of pivot. And that you are, honestly, because you'll be doing something and you see an opportunity, just literally do think outside the box, right? And that's the beauty of it. And I think that's something that I've learned quite a lot from you as well by seeing what you're doing. And I've thankfully got to say, I've learned so much in that respect where when you know that you've got to pivot, listen, you've got to do it. There's no fear behind it because you've got to just test it out. And it is testing it, continuously testing what's working. And one thing that's going to hit and it will hit, right? And during this time, everything that's going on, there's a reason why you're there and what you're doing. And that moment will come. And the fact that you say you are the queen of pivot, that is basically going to be in a headline in the show notes here. This is the queen of pivot, honestly.
You want that one-liner? You want that one-liner? That is it. Do you know what, Chet? I was just thinking, There's been so many moments in my business journey that I've had to quickly think on my feet, how are we going to get through this? Because we need money to survive, right? So even, do you remember back in, I think it was mid 2000s with all the GDPR, right? I just thought, Michelle, learn, learn, learn. And because I work with a lot of data by nature of the work that I do, I work in HR, I had to understand it for my own role, but I wanted to go over and beyond and how can people use GDPR in the wise way, in the more effective way when they have business. And then all of a sudden, I was people saying, oh, reach out to Michelle, she's the GDPR expert and all of this. And I was like, oh wow, I need to create a service. And I remember I had one post that just went viral and I was being asked to speak at big events. I remember I was no GDPR pro. I just had to pivot. And that's what the same thing. The only thing I haven't pivoted recently is I have not become an AI expert. I've kept to doing what I do, but still learning, the AI landscape. But that's the only thing I haven't pivoted this time. But everything else, I'm on it.
Yeah, but that's important because it's interesting when you said you have not become an AI expert or moved into that sort of realm. I mean, you're using it, everyone's using it on a daily basis. And in fairness, we were using it for many, many years, but not realizing it, or the word AI wasn't actually um, announced or wasn't socially public, should I say. It was only, you'd only hear it or you see it in sort of movies. In that respect, that's the only thing I can actually put it in from that into that perspective. But there's so much. I mean, AI is evolving. It's fast. There's always a new app coming out. But the fact that you said that you're not being an expert in it could be good, because the fact that you're an expert in the specific areas that you pivot into, AI integration and all of those is going to be sort of fundamental anyway. So rather than you learning a whole spectrum of AI, you need to just learn a specific part of it, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
No, it's so true. So, Michelle, I mean, we can really truly talk for hours in that respect. So, you've been inside complex organizations for almost over 25 years, like Amazon, BT, Deloitte. What do
Hmm.
most of those organizations still get fundamentally wrong about their people? What would you say that would be?
I would say they treat their employees, they see their employees as just people with lanyards, if I'm honest. It's just almost, what's the best way for me to put this? Like the Ford motor industry. That's where we first got the people working on the line. And I feel like the bigger organizations, everyone's just the lanyard. Whatever your name is and what your role is, that's who you are. And because of that, I think they're missing a trick, missing the opportunity to really understand the great assets in their organizations that move the organization forward, that challenge behaviors, that are innovative, that can push the business forward. Rather than just seeing them as a lanyard, actually see them as credible assets that can make changes within their business, within the organization, within the department. And that comes down to, investing in your resource and not just investing in them for them to learn more or develop more, but just investing in them when it comes to well-being, investing in them, getting them to understand financial well-being. Back in the day, that was never a thing, but now we have like other perks. There's quite a few like perk box and other things like that, which do more than just train your staff, develop. There's things around how do we make sure that they're financially astute. So when you're paying them, they know how to look after their money, how to invest their money. And I think that's where more organizations need to be better when it comes to their staff, I think.
Yeah. And with companies like these, the big companies that you've worked for, do you sometimes think, or I mean, what's your perspective on it? My perspective is that because they've grown so much, they've forgotten about people as they're grown, which then don't realize that, hold on a minute, the driving force behind it, the actual mechanism to run this whole engine are the people. but then it almost gets to the point where if one part is not working, which is that individual, oh, it's okay, we can easily replace it, right? But they're not looking after them. Yeah. Do you find that?
Yeah.
What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I find that. And I think everybody wants to get the best of the best. If
Mm,
you're underperforming, as it's so quick to say, actually, let's get someone new in, let's get someone else. But they don't understand. And I see this from a HR perspective, who's been a recruiter sitting in the HR division. I sit in workforce planning. What they don't see is the impact of people leaving organizations, the impact that it has on the people who have stayed, who have been retained. So rather than see, oh, let me just replace, how about we develop and how can we harness the best out of our current staff? And I think if we did more of that, and then we had openings for new people to come in rather than just replacing people like they're just cogs in a wheel. Yeah, I think that will make a better workforce altogether, most certainly.
yeah. You you've got a number of positions, right? You're also a non-exec director for two boards. What does sitting on a board teach you about leadership that you can't learn anywhere
Oh,
else?
it's expansion of language, first and foremost. If I like one of the boards that I sit on, a big bank, for example, sitting in those meetings and you're sitting with some of the big decision makers of the bank, you're sitting with other non-executive directors or committee members who head up large organizations. So the language is completely different. It's very expansive. So for me as a leader, I always want to be in rooms where I'm going to learn something. I don't always want to be the top dog. I want to, and it forces me that before we go into these team meetings, or not team meetings, before we go into our committee meetings, I read the papers, the documents, the board papers, and I'm already thinking, how can I contribute to this? And it only makes me become a better leader. It stretches my vocabulary. It stretches my way of thinking. We're now thinking of long term rather than short term immediate wins. So for me, sitting on board has been one of my game changers in leadership. And because of that, I'm now actively looking for more board memberships where I can contribute, but where also I can learn and expand my realm of business as well, for sure.
Wow. That must have been one, I mean, when we're talking about the queen of pivot, right? That must have been one hell of a learning curve too. When you first got onto the board and everyone just when everyone's just talking and you're thinking, what language are you speaking? Because it kind of is a different
Yeah,
language, right?
it's,
Okay.
it's completely
Um,
different. Even the board
yeah.
governance and the roles that we play and all these lots of acronyms. Yeah, it was a lot of learning very quickly, but yeah, I've appreciated every step of it.
Yeah, no, that's really that's such a, I mean, it's impact when you're talking about these things in terms of the board, the language, um, I'm almost thinking that how much doubt would fall into my mind. You know, it's like I actually don't know what you're talking about, but I'm willing to learn. I'm learning. I'm learning. The fact of getting into that position, and the other thing, you know, what is interesting. There's a bit of humor in this one. Have you watched Succession, the
No,
the TV show?
no, I haven't.
Oh gosh, all right. You need
Okay,
okay.
eventually.
Succession is basically, you need to watch Succession, right? It's basically uh very much that sort of language, board level language is very different. And it's based on Rupert Murdoch's story and about his
Nice.
kids and them getting the succession line. And there's also a documentary about Rupert Murdoch on Netflix as well. And we're not
Yeah,
sponsored
new
by
Netflix
Netflix on
one.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not sponsored by Netflix on this podcast. Hopefully one day we are. But no, what I'm trying to say is that level of language. Oh my gosh! When I was listening to it, I was thinking, I thought I was really stupid myself, thinking I don't understand what they're saying. But then you realize and you pick things up quite easily because obviously they speak in English as it is, but it's just a different level. It kind of
Different level,
put a lot of doubt in me personally. But did that ever happen to you in that situation when you first joined?
most certainly. And And then, when I would listen to some of the committee members speak or some of the representatives from the bank speak, sometimes they're just really verbose. They are saying the biggest words, the longest words, and it's like a linguistic exercise. And then what I try and do is, and then I usually say in the chat, so simply, what does this mean? Because I just want you to, and I think we get into this thing, where people feel that they are bigger, better, greater because they can use the most longest words. And really, we have been brought up, especially in this entrepreneurial world, is to simplify so that like a fifth grader or a sixth grader can understand. So it's really funny when you now sit in these rooms and it's like people measuring how long things are, right? How big their stuff are. That's how it comes across. And so, and sometimes when I contribute, I always, I never come from an apologetic perspective. I come from the perspective of, okay, so simply, I just want to ask this question. And it's so clear, they get it. And I can almost see their light bulbs like, why don't we think this? Or why don't we say it like that? And so I like that I do bring something to the table, which is different from them. And I come from the perspective of human resources. So I'm always looking at risk. I'm always looking at workforce. I'm looking at how what we do impacts internal staff as well as their external stakeholders. But I always put it in the most simplest and easiest terms that everybody understands because I'm coming from an inclusive background as well. So I don't like when people feel left out or they feel excluded or they feel like, God, I don't understand a word that's going on. So it's my job to simplify the process.
So it's so refreshing to hear that, because that's exactly how I operate. And I recall one time when I was in the corporate world working, I was asked to come into a meeting where you had all the execs there, and then you had somebody, I'm going to call the person a salesperson, but they were trying to sell a piece of tech to the business.
Mm.
And I'm sitting in the back. I've got nothing to do with this company. I'm just here as an observer. And this person who's presenting in front, he's going off on this whole speaking technical language and everything. Now, I understood a bit of it because I come from a tech background, but I'm looking at everybody else, and
Yeah.
they're just looking. And these lot are all like sort of at that level. They're at the exec level. And I'm thinking, surely they don't all understand this, right? Because I'm also struggling to this, and I'm not afraid to raise my hand here. But I'm waiting for somebody to raise their hand. And nobody raised their hand. And then when it came to the end and the guy said, has anybody got any questions? So I raised my hand at the back. I said, look, I'm an observer, but I've got a question. Did anybody really understand what this person said? That was my question to everybody. And they looked with relief. They were like, we didn't. I said, so why didn't you lot speak up? You're not going to purchase a 100,000, a six-figure bloody tech for your company, right? What are you lot doing here? I said to the guy, I think you need to really put it into layman's terms for people, man, honestly, because if I understood some of the stuff, they didn't understand anything. They're signing the check off, and I'm not going to allow them to sign a check off because they don't understand what they're buying, right? And he was like, oh, didn't realize. I wish somebody said that. 45 minutes later, I'm thinking, oh, it was so funny when you said simplify that. I just was in that room again.
And I think you're so right. And then that shows your leadership style, right? Your leadership is, we need to be understanding. We need to make informed decisions. And so this is exactly what we have to do. When you're selling to companies, they're not hiring you because they think you're the most cleverest or, you're the most articulate. They want to understand it well enough because the decision-making tree, there's a number of levels, and they have to now convey what you've told them to somebody else and to someone else to make a final decision. So if it's like Chinese whispers. If you say something that's quite complex at the beginning, by the time you got to the end, nobody knows what you're talking about. So I always say, simplify from the beginning. You could have something complex that you're going to do, but you show them how you're going to deliver it simply, and they can still pay you premium because it's still a complex deliverable, but you've simplified the process. That's the
Yeah,
difference.
yeah, yeah. So true. So true. So that's one to know. If you don't understand anything, you're okay to raise your hand, okay? You're not gonna look any different to anyone in that side. So you lost £14,000 because of who people thought you were associated with. Yeah?
Mhm.
Do you want to walk me through what actually happened here?
So I run a series of in-person masterclasses, and therefore they are positioned for entrepreneurs who want to get corporate contracts. So I support them with the whole journey of finding the right people, putting your pitch together, proposing to them, either completing RFPs, all of that. That side of the company supports on that. And I had a 2-day masterclass, and two people came to me and said, Michelle, we've really, really, really love this. And I said, I'd love to work with you further. And they said, yeah, we would love to, but we just can't. So I said, why not? And they said, oh, because we've seen that you've been associated with a couple of people and we don't like them. So I said, okay, tell me more. And they were coming from the perspective of either they've worked with one person and that person ripped them off, and another one, I think they just had like a bad experience within their coaching program, possibly. And so, as far as they were concerned, because they have probably might have seen me in a couple of events with that person, or I don't know, it could have been a picture, possibly. They just assumed that I was in bed with these people, and they're two separate people, actually. And I said, no, that's not the case. What has happened is because we operate at the same level, we get invited to the same types of events. And so obviously you will see us at the same event. But because that person, these two people had lost their trust and faith in them, they just found it a struggle to move to the next level with me. And that just really I was really upset by that, by the way, right? But then it got me thinking, we talk about our network is our net worth. At the same time, we still have to be careful of who we are associated with if we don't know their business acumen, their business journey, and actually how they treat their clients. Because you just don't know the perception. And someone said to me, perception is projection. Yeah, I think that's what they said. Perception is projection. So people will judge you by the people that you surround yourself with. And know that, right? But that was a real stickler in my perception and just how I now see my network, because I can't afford for this to happen again. But then I do not have the time to do my due diligence with everybody I'm hanging around with at the same time. So,
Exactly.
it's a difficult one, Chet. I found it really
Yeah.
difficult to get my head round. And to be fair, I still don't have the answers. But yeah, it's a tricky one.
Yeah. You can't do DBS and verification checks on everyone that you meet, right? Is this person worth meeting, right? But yeah, I totally understand. So you did say we are actually told you're right. Your network is your net worth, but you're saying your network can also become your negative as well, right?
Most definitely.
Yeah.
Most definitely. And
So
with all the goodwill in the
yeah.
world, and the thing is, you can't live your life by what other people think of other people or their own
Mm,
experiences. Really and truly, those people, if they've already experienced me, they should know my character and how I
hmm
deliver and the customer service that I operate. And that should have been enough. But probably for some people, their risk appetite is smaller than others. And so, I've continued to do what I do because I know that my brand can stand up by itself, and I cannot start, assessing everybody who is around me, because I just don't have the time nor the inclination to do so. So yeah, it's a very tricky one.
It is. I mean, it's one that it's a continuous learning process again. When
Sure.
you're around different people, I mean, you surround yourself with people that you think you should be surrounded by versus you surround yourself with people that you should be surrounded by, and then
Mm,
sometimes it doesn't quite sort of marry up, and then you learn from those situations. So you either learn the hard way or you learn. I mean, you're only ever going to learn the hard way from that, but it's what you
yeah.
do to take and what you do from that learning.
Mm.
So true.
most
So true.
certainly.
So you said something before about passion, right? So you said follow your passion is unfinished advice. Yeah. Can you tell me what that means?
Yeah. So we hear it all the time. Follow your
Yeah.
passion and you'll get the money afterwards. I just thought to myself, it just sounds so unfinished because we all would love to follow our passion, but I think the sentence needs to be finished. It should be like something like follow your passion, but make sure it's a passion that pays. Something similar to that rather than just follow your passion because not everybody's passion pays. And we have to really understand the market in which we all operate in. Everyone's got their different market, their different niches. And there might be things I love to do, but I know they don't pay very well. I know there's things I love to do within a certain niche, and that particular niche or industry do not pay very well. So my thing is follow the passion that pays. Because ultimately it comes down to money, right? And although it sounds cold and arbitrary, at the end of the day, we do what we love for different organizations because we want to get paid. We want to be able to give a good life to our family. We want to be able to give to charity. We want to help those who are less fortunate than ourselves. And all of that takes money. So when I had this conversation with someone before, I do a lot of leadership training within the oil and gas industry. Between me and you and all of your hundreds and thousands of followers and listeners and readers, it's not a sexy environment. Oil and gas, there's nothing alluring about the oil and gas industry and understanding how they operate and understanding how people operate when they're working on the rigs and understanding the supply chain. It's not sexy. It doesn't sound exciting. The difference is I'm passionate about leadership, but I work in an industry that pays. And there's not very many leadership trainers that work in the area of entrepreneurship and innovation in the oil and gas industry, which means I can then
Yeah.
charge a premium because I have less competition. Now, the sexy areas like media or advertising, and the competition will be fiercer and you're probably passionate, or if you want to work with charity because it's your passion, if you want to work in education, they're passionate, but they don't always pay so well. So I always say work, do what you love, do what you're passionate about in a field that pays. That's what I meant
Yeah.
by I think following your passion is unfinished.
That's powerful, but it's true. You don't see it that way. Follow your passion in a way that it pays because it is about money. I don't care what anyone says, right? Money is got to be there for that situation. That everything revolves around money. Okay. And I know people will argue to that point. Some people may disagree, but the people that disagree may just come from a ton load of money, right? Not everybody comes from that money too. Okay. But to follow your passion and make sure it pays is so powerful, and it's something to remember because so many people are quite humble enough to say, well, don't need that much money. But it's not a case of not needing that much money. You've probably got enough money to live your life how you want to live it. Whereas that amount of money won't be enough for me to live my life how I want to live it because I've got the family or I've got extra luxuries that I just don't want to let go of and I want to enjoy it.
Yeah,
Right. But, you know, everyone's got
absolutely.
their own unique ability and unique life in it. And it does evolve around money.
And the
It's very true.
somebody had said to me, with my programs or my classes, which I do for
Mm.
entrepreneurs, why do I
Yeah.
price it at the price that I do, which is at the lower end, right? I make it affordable. And I said, my passion is working with entrepreneurs. Now, I know how much I'm worth. But I know that the entrepreneurs that I'm serving cannot charge me what I'm worth. So what I do is I subsidize. So I work with organizations delivering a service for them and they pay me. And because they all pay me well enough, I can now subsidize the work that I really want to do with entrepreneurs. So that is the reason why I will do something passionate that pays so that when I'm really doing what really makes me light up, I can do it with people who do not have to then remortgage. They don't have to steal from Paul to pay Steve. They're not using their last dime because I don't get the best out of them. So that's why I do what I do, because my passion is working with entrepreneurs, and I just charge somebody else so that I can work with people who can afford me.
That's such a great sort of model to sort of follow as well in order to do something that you are passionate about from that perspective. So, what's one rule you've burnt for yourself and realized you're now in control after burning it?
Ooh, I think if I had to one rule, I think it just goes down to back to my network. But I think it's about curating, not just
Mm,
creating, but curating a new type of network. So I don't expect my network to be filled with people who are replicas of me. And what I've always done and what I continue to try and do is I try to cultivate a network outside of my culture zone. And the rule is birds of a feather flock together. People gravitate to people who are like them, who they know, like, and trust. When people put events together and they say, network with like minded people, this is a rule that I have broken. And I tell you why. Because I don't want to just network with people who look like me, believe the same things as me, eat the same foods as me. I want to learn from different people. I'm in a majority Muslim country. So when there's options to go to a tourist area or go to a local area, myself and my daughter, we will pick up ourselves and we'll go to the local zoo instead of the tourist zoo. We will go to events where there's more nationals because I want to learn something new. So it puts me on a back burner because I don't speak Arab. It puts me on a back burner because I don't understand their culture. But once I'm around long enough, I'll start to understand. I'll start to pick up. They'll start to trust me. I start to trust them. I'm moving outside my culture zone. I don't want to be in a flock where we're all the same. I don't want to go to events where we all think the same because my thinking might be here. I need to be in a room where they think up there. And
yeah.
so that's one of the rules that I break. And I've got my friend out here, and what we agreed to do is we need to learn something new every week. Or when we go to networking events, we need to network with people outside our culture zone. And we've been doing this, and we're like, basically, we're competing with each other to see who can do it the most. We've gamified it, but ultimately the principle still remains.
That's brilliant. But it's so true, though. I mean, you've got to, I mean, why do you want to be networking with people who are like minded and look like you? That's what you've got in common. I mean, that's not networking in my perspective. Networking is going to somebody who you don't even know completely, and looking for something different out there. And it's so much more fun doing it that way as well. You know, because you just don't know who you're going to sort of bump into or who they will be connected to or anything like that. It's a lot more interesting way of doing things.
So much more interesting, and you just learn so much. I've got a couple of new Emirati friends out here, and we went for a meal. And when we went for the meal, I went to pick up. We went for afternoon tea, and and I said, "Oh, let me get you a cake." And she said, "No, no, 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 no." She said, "In our culture, because we are hosting you, I invited you out, so you must sit and wait, and we will serve you." I wanted to serve her because I wanted to thank her. But it's those kind of things that you learn, you know. And you also learn that if you're going to someone's house, you bring a gift, So it's these types of things that I would take for granted because if I'm just hanging around people who are like me, you can come to my house. You don't need to bring a dime. You don't need to bring anything. But I now know that when I'm going to certain people's, I bring a gift. And I wouldn't know that if I didn't expand my culture zone.
It's so true. The amount of things that you learn from it all. It's fascinating when you learn from different cultures. Oh, I love that. So, Michelle, we're going to talk about a bit more about sort of how you sort of control yourself sort of under pressure, yeah, or what you've gone through over certain periods of your sort of career. So you were made redundant during maternity leave without consultation, and
Yes.
I mean, that's a serious time, okay, right? But that's not just professional pressure. That's also personal. But
Mhm.
what did that moment do to how you think about trust in organizations, for example?
Yeah, it really lessened my trust in organizations. And I thought, if you can do this, and I've worked with you for so long, there's no commitment. There was no commitment there. But what that did teach me is, Michelle, you need to understand HR from the inside out. And it was then from there, I did my certificate, I did a diploma, and then I did a master's degree in it. Then I started doing like some freelance. Well, the freelance came later on, but I really wanted to, that really propelled me on my path of helping employees understand their rights. So when I first started running my business, I was working for the employee. So if they had contracts, I said, before you sign the contract, let me review it for you. Go back and contest this, ask for that, because it's working too much in favor of the employer. So I was doing all of that. And then eventually I moved from working for the employer to the employer, from the employee to the employer. And this time I was ensuring that they were being fair, that they were being equitable when it came to dealing with their employees. So I just used the same principle, but now I was doing it for the organization to make sure that they were making sure that they were progressing staff on equal merit, making sure that people aren't being left out the matrix because they're so close to it they couldn't see it. So it just gave me a driving force, and I just like ran with it, and I've not looked back since. And I do it
Yeah.
until now. I have clients who are on a retainer with me when they're looking for ways to possibly dismiss. I'm like, right, let's look at this in its entirety. Let's look at some other ways, because
Mm,
dismissal for me should be the very last resort, because you're taking away food from people's mouths. And that's
yeah.
not what I'm here to do. When you're hiring me as your HR, fractional HR, understand, I'm going to try and find ways that you can keep your staff. And sometimes that's worked
Mm,
against me. And I've been in organizations where they've let me go because of that. But that's my principle. That should always be your last
yeah.
resort.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, have you been have you been let go with that? Because some organizations can sort of be like, nope, this is what we want to do.
Yeah.
Figure out how we're paying you, and they'll throw that sort of thing at you, and then be like, well, hold on a minute, it's not my principle, man. You're going against my
Yeah.
value here, right? I'm not
Sure.
here to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
It
happened to
must be a
me. That's
tough one
happened to
though, isn't it? It must be quite tough though
me.
in that scenario when you're like a client you've got, and then they've come to you and they're talking about dismissal, but then you go to them and then say, well, in theory, do you need to dismiss this person? There are different ways of doing things. It must not be
It has been
I'm sure they
difficult.
don't want to hear that.
Nah, no, they don't. They really don't. And I see from their perspective, from a commercial perspective, but I always want them to think about the more humane perspective. And okay, what if I'm very good at brainstorming ideas to retain your staff? I talk about retention and stability, so I have to lead with that. So I always think of, I wonder whether we can have a conversation, a protected conversation with the staff. And in that protected conversation, we can think about probably reducing salary as a way to retain them. Or can we fit them into somewhere else in the business? Or can we put them on a sabbatical for a number of months and then they come back to the same role? There's so many ways that you can do, creative ways you can do to retain your staff. And if we've exhausted all of that and we know it can't work, the company's too small to fit them into other different ways, and then the only way is redundancy or dismissal, then we can do that. But then even on the dismissal, I want them to even go that further. What support can we give them on their on their exit? Is there any support that I can give them? Is there any outplacement services? So yeah, because I've been there and I know thousands of other people have been there and experienced it, I'm trying to lessen the blow.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I mean, that's really important in a position to be in, sort of knowing that because you could have easily been just led the other way, almost like, you know what, okay, you want to dismiss this person, fine, okay, let's figure it out. But you're like stuck to your guns and saying, like, this isn't how I operate. It's about the people, about the fact that they still need to basically provide food on the table. And that's a huge principle for you, and I know that. It's hats off to you for sticking to your guns, so to speak,
Yeah.
in situations like that, even if it's going to mean you losing a client for it. So you've described being a corporate introvert in a world that rewards extroversion. But how do you hold your ground in those moments, Michelle, particularly when you're the one leading the room itself?
So, just to expand more on the question for me in terms of the introvert and
So
extrovert.
yeah, so you basically when I was reading a few things, it's like describing being a sort of a corporate introvert in the world that
Hmm.
rewards extroversion. So you kind of like internally not sort of you're not always out there, should I say,
Yes.
when there's a company that basically requires the whole you need to be out there sort of thing, but you're going to hold yourself
Hmm.
in a little bit. It's almost like seeing yourself from the back and then now just observing everything before you go, you know what, I'm going to go straight for the
Yeah.
kill kind of thing, but you always hold back
Yes.
first. That's what I mean. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. And so in my perspective, in my opinion, I think there's a place for introversion.
Hmm.
And they just have a different strategy of doing business or doing work. And I'll tell you where they come in really handy. I haven't been, I think in my entrepreneurial space, I've been more of an extrovert, but when I was in corporate, I was more of an introvert. But what that allowed me to do is take time to understand people better. That made me a very good listener, a very good listener. So if I don't understand something, I'll ask questions. I'm more of the observer. I'll watch how people behave and engage and interact with people before I say anything. I tend to still do that now, even in business. But when I was working, did a lot of that. And I built trust very early on with senior leaders. And I did a lot of matching and mirroring, understood how senior people operated. And that enabled me to not just get mentors within organizations, but sponsors, which is different. The sponsors are those people who are actually going to speak about me in rooms that I'm not in. And I was able to cultivate that because I was a bit more reserved, because I was more of a listener and an observer. And so I could really understand people better. And then when I started studying NLP on top of that, which is neuro linguistic programming, that just helped, solidify the type of person I was. So I think introversion really plays an important role. And you do not have to be an extrovert to always have your voice heard. That's how we've been told, always be speaking up. Sometimes the people that win are the ones that are observing and they go in stealthily behind, and that's where they make their name.
It is about stealth mode at times, you know.
Yes.
That's where that's where it can be, and most often can be the most impactful way of doing things, and especially getting what you want as well. But it's an art, and it's an art that takes time as well.
Yeah, it's definitely an art because I remember I did a talk and I said there's a difference between making a noise and making a sound. And there's lots of loud people, they are making noise. And the noise is empty noise, like an empty bucket, where there's some people a bit more composed, a bit more reserved. They make sounds, and sounds are reverberated, and you hear them as time goes on. And that's what I want to be known for, making a sound and not making a noise.
So we're gonna just want to understand a little bit more about you as a leader. Okay, so you gave a TED talk about one of the most personally devastating things that can happen to someone. Yeah, being
Mhm.
married to a man who got later accused of serious crimes, becoming an indirect victim through the publicity and the stigma of all of that that followed. You were made visible for the wrong reasons entirely in that situation.
Yes.
What what did that experience do to you? What did that experience do to who you became as a leader?
Wow, that's a really good question. So that during that time of hearing that my ex-husband was accused of some of those heinous crimes against children and then having to go to court, sitting in court, I remember when I went into court, I went to go and sit down and someone put their hand there and said, "Oh, you can't sit here. We don't want you sitting next to us." These types of things were happening. Around the area that I used to live, it was in the newspapers, and I remember walking on the street and people, not people, one particular person spat in my face, right? This is what I had to deal with, and I couldn't react, and I couldn't, there was no repercussions, right? I could do. My daughter's school was telling me that I should change her surname and those types of things. All of this, I kept quiet. I kept quiet. I shut my mouth through it all. The BBC reached out to me. They wanted to interview me. I had newspapers who wanted to reach out to me and get my side of the story. But I kept stum. And I said, now is not the right time. I don't have the mental capacity. I'm not in the right headspace, especially because then I started getting depressive episodes.
Yeah.
I had what this thing called urinitis when you're stressed and
Right.
in a highly pressured environment that, you wet yourself. And those things started happening to me in public. And I just
Wow.
thought, what can I do at this point? And I tell you how it impacted me as a leader is it taught me to keep quiet when I needed to and speak up when it was the right time. And I spoke up at that TEDx talk. I then started to speak up and I was doing interviews, I was doing podcast interviews, but I was at a stronger position. This is now where I was now leading from the front. As leaders, we know sometimes we lead from the front and sometimes we lead from the back. And at that time, I was at the back. I
Yeah.
was in an offensive position. I couldn't do much. I just didn't have the wherewith to do anything. But once as time went on and I started educating myself, I started really loving myself. I didn't hold myself accountable. I stopped blaming myself. I got stronger. Then now I was now on the offensive. And now it was time for me to speak and speak my truth and speak my story. And that has impacted me as a leader like no other. I stand by the belief that you should be visible for the right reasons. At the time, I was visible for the wrong reasons. And now I have my own brand. I have my own name. I have my own character. I'm not standing beside anyone. I'm not standing behind anyone. I don't have to even rely on this same story to get me clicks and more followers because I now have a new brand. At the time, I was known as the wife of the pedophile. That was my title. That
Yeah.
was the name that people gave me. That's the name that the newspapers gave me. And when I became who I am today, I'm known as Michelle Raymond. I am now known as a leadership strategist, a HR futurist, an author, a public speaker. I wear a new name. And that is because I was quiet when I needed to be, and I spoke up
Mm.
when the world required me to speak and when it was time for me to speak. And that's changed my leadership style a whole 360.
And she's the pivot queen too. Yeah.
You agree?
Thank you for sharing that. That's powerful. And I mean, just to go through those sort of scenarios in that situation and wish it upon anybody. But what you've built, yeah, you built your whole career, okay, around making the invisible visible. Yeah.
Visible, yes.
And giving people the platform, the skills, the confidence to be seen on their own
Yes.
terms. Okay. Okay. Is that the mission directly connected to what happened to you? And did the pain of
Mm.
actually being in the wrong way create the purpose, should we say?
Most certainly, most certainly. It's being visible. And I remember I sat in church and the preacher I've heard him obviously many times before. And the one thing he said that I've heard loads of times is be transformed by the renewing of your mind. It's a scripture that we all know, right? But for that particular moment, it just changed everything for me. I had to change the way that I think about myself. I had to change the way that I think about my situation. I was a mother. Social services were threatening to take my daughter away from me. I had to think about how I showed up in public so that didn't happen. And I thought to myself, and I said to God, I said, first of all, I said, if you get me out, and then I changed it to when you bring me out of this, I will never be invisible again. And that has stuck with me. And I need to be visible on my own terms and not what the world says that I should be visible or not what friends and family think how I should be visible. I want to do life on my terms. It may not be always agreeable with other people. People might think, oh, Michelle, we don't like the way that you're doing this. I will always make sure I do things in a respectful way, but it's got to be on my terms because I lived for so long doing things on other people's terms. And that whole issue was like a 3, 4 year thing, you know?
Yeah,
That
wow.
whole
Yeah.
going to court and dealing with all of the publicity around it, having my house, people throwing bricks through my window of my house and all of that. And I kept quiet. And I said to God, when you get me out of this, I will never be invisible again. And that's been my passion in when I'm working with people. Even my book, David's Guide to Goliath, it's the story of somebody who's small, facing the giants, somebody who is invisible, and he was made visible by the right strategies, having the 5 stones, finding the one stone that was able to slay Goliath. It's the same with my story. It's the same with your story. Many of us being visible for the right reasons. And that stuck with me. And in all the work I do, even around leadership and innovation and entrepreneurship, it's looking at those silent innovators within the organizations, those silent people who have that entrepreneurial flair, who can think of great ideas, and the company have not even identified that they have great innovators within the organizations. They have their own Davids within the organizations, and it's my job to help them find that. That's
Wow,
what we
that's
do.
beautiful. That's beautiful. So, talking about sort of visibility, yeah, you're now rolling out a retention and stability program right now for the UA for you companies facing obviously talent loss. Okay,
Yeah.
what's the one thing most leaders are getting wrong in how they are responding to this?
They're not talking enough. They're not keeping the communication lines open enough, I don't think. And when it first happened, it was a shock. And I think it's the shock. And they've all just responded with unpaid leave or, take time off until we know what we're doing. And then nothing's being said. And there's a lot of employees in limbo. There's a lot of people like, do I stay? Do I go back? What's happening? Now, what I'm saying to employees, you don't need to have all the right answers. You don't need to have all the answers, but you need to keep the lines of communication open because people feel safe when they know that there is transparency. So what I try and do is trying to get them to do keep in touch days. And in England, we know we used to just keep those kit days, we call it, just for people who are pregnant and they're at home. Kit days can be rolled out across all organizations, no matter where they are, whether they're under crisis or not crisis. And there's a way that you do it. And so I'm teaching them about the kit days and also what to say and what not to say, what not to promise, but the types of conversations you need to be having and ensuring that they have the leadership capabilities for when the market reopens to how it was before. Are you ready to look after the staff that stayed around or how to retain the good talent that you do have, that they don't leave and go back to their home countries or go somewhere else. So there's a lot of learnings that we're trying to support companies, and not just Emirati companies, but also PLCs, LCs in the GCC regions on how to retain and stabilize your workforce now so that you don't pay the price later.
Wow, wow. So you based on that, you built this framework around entrepreneurship as the answer to sort of innovation inside organizations, etc. But what does that actually look like for a leader who wants to basically start tomorrow with this?
Yeah, so the framework walks there is something that we can teach them or we can deliver it for them or they can do it in-house. But effectively, the framework walks them through steps that they need to do consequentially on how to identify talent who may leave within 6 to 12 months because they want to become entrepreneurs, on getting them to harness that entrepreneurial flair within the organization, how to nurture them, how to give them challenging work that challenges them, that stretches them, that helps them to innovate, how to give them space to do this. Because what tends to happen, there's a lot of great people who have lots of ideas, but they have nowhere safe to land those ideas. They're seen as difficult workers because they're always thinking of new ideas and always want to push the boundaries. But it's how do we harness those talents and utilize it for the best and the furtherance of the organization. And so the methodology takes them through those steps where they win, but also the employee wins, because the employees, they get to utilize their new ideas. They probably get paid even more money because they're doing better work. And the company, they get commercial wins by having these innovative staff, and they don't always have to hire in new people.
That's fantastic. And we'll get information on that in the show notes as well for this, so you can actually reach out to Michelle. So, Michelle, what's one move the person listening or watching can make this week, right now, with what they have heard?
I would say, what's the one thing they can do right now? I would say, I'll tell you what they'll do. Because this is based on what I did say earlier when we were talking about our networks, but I will go a bit further than networking. And I think the one thing that every listener can do is start looking at ways they can partner with either other people or other organizations. I think with what's all going on, although it's heavy in the UAE and the GCC regions, it's going to impact the whole world, what's going on. And my thing is, you cannot be solo out here right now. So it is survival of the fittest, and those that win are the ones that are partnered with other people or other organizations or other brands. So have a look at what you do, and you almost do a recce of what you bring to the table, and look at organizations that you complement and can complement you, and start, pitching to these organizations and say, let's have a conversation. This is what you do, and this is the gap. I fill the gap. How can we work together? And now you be a part of their service. It could be an extension to their service. It could be an extension to your service, but it helps with brand positioning. It builds that trust. It now gives you an extra stream of income. And these are the things and the staples that we're going to need as 2026 progresses. Is partnerships and collaborations are going to be the way forward for sure.
There you have it. No, thanks for that. Partnerships, such an important thing. You've got me thinking of a few partnership ideas now as well. You're saying that.
Definitely.
Right. Before we wrap up, I'm going to play a quick game. It's called 10 and Done. So it's 10 questions, short answers, no thinking. It's basically the first thing that comes to mind. Yeah. Okay. Are you ready for this?
Oh my God. Think quickly, Mish. All right. We got this.
Yeah. Here we go. What's your most used phrase at work?
You've got to be visible.
What was that?
You've got to be visible.
You've got to be visible. There you go. Okay. What's a habit you've kept for years?
Discipline over desire. I'm very disciplined.
What's one thing you're irrationally strict about?
Praying in the morning.
What's your go-to reset after a long day?
Eating white cheddar popcorn.
Wow. Okay. I'm going to have to try that. What's a book you've gifted more than once?
My own book, David's Guide to Goliath.
Yeah, I was going to say, you shouldn't need to think about that one. And what's a tool or app you'd hate to lose?
Zero.
Zero? Is that an app?
Yeah, because that's my invoicing. That's how I get paid.
Really?
I need my...
Gonna have to look.
Yeah.
Gonna have to look at that one. Okay. What's your most underrated skill?
Oh, my most underrated skill. I think bringing people together. Yeah, I think it's so underrated. I'm very good at it.
Yeah, you are. And what's something people often get wrong about you?
Well, they think I'm stuck up. I get
Do
this
they?
told a lot. Really and truly, I'm the most down to
Have you got
earth
that
person
look?
ever. Yeah, people think
might-
I've got this look where I'm very stuck up.
My wife's the same. What's one small luxury you never skip? Oh, you're speaking my language. And what's one thing you're looking forward to in the next 90 days?
Winning the 2 contracts that I've just pitched for.
There we go. It's going to happen. Yeah. Wicked. Well done to that. So I love that. Right. So before we go, you've got the talent revolution out now. Okay. Tell people what is it and who it's for.
Yeah, it's an audio book, and I've designed it for leaders, decision makers, CEOs, within organizations who want to really harness the talent within. And it's called The Talent Revolution. It's an audio book. Even the first 2 chapters is enough for you to glean the information you need. And it's available. I send it out to people who want to really understand if they have quiet innovators within the organizations.
Amazing. And we'll include the link to that all in the notes as well. So you can contact Michelle directly for that. And where's the best place for people to connect and find you, Michelle?
My 2 playgrounds are LinkedIn and Instagram.
There we go. So LinkedIn
And
and
I'm under
Instagram,
Michelle
again, those
Raymond.
links. Yep. And those links will be there on the show notes as well. So make sure you follow all of her content as well. And just, yeah, she's an amazing person. So Michelle, want to say thank you so much for being part of the show. I had a really, really great time here. The Tenant was amazing, but everything else as well that you were able to sort of share with us for us to learn and get inspired by, and then making sure that everybody still stays visible. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been an honor. Much honor.
Great stuff. And that's a wrap. Before you go, take a moment to think about what stayed with you from this conversation. Not what sounded impressive, but what challenged how you think, decide, or lead. See, leadership isn't something you wait for. It's something you practice internally, daily, and deliberately. And remember this, you can't lead a life that matters by following rules that don't. If this episode gave you perspective, share it with someone who's ready to take more control of how they lead and perform. And subscribe wherever you listen, and keep redefining leadership on your own terms.